Our last speaker is Woody Delp from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And thanks everyone for holding on to this point. And thanks for Woody for being on the call for, quite a bit before your turn to speak. Woody has been doing a lot of work and research on smoke intrusion and indoor health, including newer work that he's been going to talk about on air quality monitoring. And so this will kind of be still very important for places that are dealing with wildfires themselves, but this gets a little into all of the other communities that we spoke about that, also had the severe smoke events, even if they weren't dealing with fires immediately. So thanks, Woody.
Thank you. And can everybody see my screen?
No, we saw it for a second and then it went away.
Now. You should see the full screen view of my presentation.
No, we're still seeing, I think, just the Zoom. Can you try and share again?
Yes. Want desktop 2.
That works.
Excellent, excellent. So what I'm going to talk about today, not as much focus on codes and standards, but more focus on, we're in an interesting time now where we actually have the ability to measure PM in particular inside a home. And I guess, back up a little bit, I've been working at LBL. I came out as a postdoc back in 1995, almost to the day now. So it's been quite some time, and I've got a long experience in HVAC systems and indoor air quality. I've been crawling around HVAC systems literally my entire life. I was born in a contracting business, and I'm quite comfortable with residential systems as well as million-square-foot office buildings. But more recently, I've been working, the last 10 years or so, and focused more on the residential space, and so I'm quite comfortable there. And boy, last fall, that looked pretty cool, or wait a minute, I should say bad. And while I was outside at the time on this particular day, I knew that the air quality monitors that were around were actually pretty good, but I'm looking up, like, that stuff's riding the marine layer above us, and boy, if that thing collapses, are we in a world of hurt? And so this is representing, here in the Bay Area, and wasn't really that bad, and we'll get to there in a second. But in the Bay Area, we weren't directly in the the WUI. We're not. Well, there's a lot of people that are here in Oakland, but a lot of people aren't, and we're still heavily impacted by these smoke events that happen from far away. And to understand a little bit more about this, I want to just take the time to go into a little bit of a primer on particulate matter, PM, call it PM 101. And the EPA has this great graphic that gets used by pretty much everyone who does this little introductory beginning talk on what is PM particulate matter. And in the PM world, in the PM community, we care a lot about the size of the material. And we consider things like human hair, and from an indoor air perspective, human hair is considered like these boulders. They're ginormous things, something that's up into 50, 60, 80 micron in diameter just really doesn't move around much. Even the PM10 stuff, which is pollens, everything such as that, they can come into a home, but they're very, very easy to take care of. And the PM2.5, you'll hear a lot about, and gets mentioned in the news as far as spare the air type of day. The PM2.5 corresponds to particulate matter in the air that's 2.5 microns or smaller. So you can sort of see the hair here ringed by 10 micron size particles, and the 10 micron size particles are ringed by 2.5 micron size particles. And while our direct combustion byproducts are down into this, what some people call an ultrafine particle region. They're submicron in size, or down to they may start out as small as 6, 10, 20 nanometers. And as they bump into each other and they move around, they eventually grow up into somewhat larger size particles. Much like people have been concerned over the last year with a virus that's floating around, the virus itself is also down around, it's a sub-micron size viral particle, but we're more concerned about these larger droplets where the virus is found. The same thing sort of holds with the combustion byproducts. Things are burning at the fire site along the hillside or the mountainside, or unfortunately a community that goes up in flames. These particles, by the time they travel their tens of kilometers, up to 150 miles, and impact places, large metropolitan areas, the particles have grown up to this 0.2, 0.3 micron size range. And that's actually pretty important because that's a range that's hard to get rid of with filtration. It causes other issues. And knowing something about what the actual PM levels, what we're trying to control to, is also kind of important for us. And unfortunately, we don't have any current standards for indoor levels. But we do have these two for outdoors. And for the outdoors, the EPA and the World Health Organization have a very similar set of standards. They'd like to see it, at 12 micrograms of material in this PM 2.5 range per cubic meter of air. And they want that to be like a long-term average. You're allowed to go over that for certain periods of time. We generally want to see things 12 or less. And fortunately, here in California, particularly in the Bay Area, we do have, by and large, pretty good air quality as far as PM is concerned. And we are normally much, much less than 12, except whenever we're not. And that's usually happened, unfortunately, now. We have the wildfires coming in. And OSHA has a requirement that is literally 1,000 times higher. And so OSHA will allow industrial workers to be exposed to general, what they call nuisance dust here. And so there's also some differences between, well, we're starting to find out that wildfire smoke is not quite, the same as more general nuisance dust. There's some particular constituents in wildfire smoke that are very, very concerning. And the particle size allows it to, that 0.3 micron, travel deep down into the lungs. Fortunately, most of that gets exhaled back out, but certainly there is the possibility of portions of it going straight into your blood barrier. So, oh my goodness, I did not mean to do that. Sorry, what did I do? Here we go. Is my screen still back up?
Yeah, we're back on track.
Okay. I don't know what I clicked on there. I didn't click in the right spot of the screen. But what people are usually seeing now, researchers or somebody who is an air quality person will certainly know these, these actual mass concentration values. But what gets reported on the news is an AQI score. An AQI is an air quality index, and it attempts to map out what these values are and into something that's good, moderate, and they have a color coding that goes along with it. And so whenever we had that orange air, ironically at the time, we were still in an AQI that was, going lightly transitioning from the good to the moderate area. There's also particular types of mappings for other pollutants, what the EPA calls criteria pollutants of concern. So there's PM10, there's ozone, there's CO, there's smog. And so these map out so you get the same AQI score, but obviously with very different units that are sitting behind each one. And a thing of note is the AQI score is based on a 24-hour daily average. And we'd like to, think conditions are changing relatively rapidly. They allow it to be reported with a 3-hour average. So there's going to be lags and steps in the reported values where you'll see an AQI score go suddenly from, the good to maybe even an orange range, or there may be a lag and all of a sudden that smoke comes into town and the AQI index is still reporting that it's pretty good out. So like I just said, on this day, it was in the green to slightly yellow, but the next day it was in the red to slightly purple. It was really bad. Now, historically, the instruments that are used for regulatory reporting values, they're called, a federal reference method, or what's shown here are federal equivalent methods, and they're quite expensive. They cost, $30,000 or more. They require quite a bit of care and feeding to make sure the numbers that are coming out of them are good. The stuff that I've had in my research toolbox for a number of years, they're also not cheap. They tend to cost $7,000 or so. And now currently we're getting, so I said the exciting time, some consumer-based monitors that have an embedded sensor within that costs, $20 or so, or maybe even less on scale to an OEM manufacturer. And they're packaging that into a device that they're offering to a consumer that costs $300 or less. It has a web interface that hooks up to your phone. You get all kinds of notifications. And the question is, are they any good and how can they be? So to understand that, let's look at a little bit of the theory on how these things work. And whether it's the industrial health and my research sort of instrument that costs, upwards of $10,000, or these lower cost instruments, they all work on the same basic fundamental principle, and that's light scattering. You can see my dog walking in the hills up here in Oakland, and the sun shining through, and there was some wildfire smoke off in the distance, and it wasn't a particularly bad day, but it sort of shows the illumination from the side. And the important message here is the response that this thing, shines back on, it can actually see. It's a function of the mass of the stuff that's in the air. It's a function of the density of the particles themselves, the size of the particles, and the optical properties of the particles. And what I'm trying to say here is you've got to have source-specific calibrations for everything that this instrument is going to be exposed to. And unfortunately, different wildfires, or the same wildfire on different days, can cause slightly different, calibration coefficients that would get applied. Let's take a look at a little bit of wildfire data. This was the Camp Fire impacting the Bay Area in November of 2018. And what I'm showing here, this little arrow down near the marina in Berkeley, and this happens to be very, very close to the air quality monitoring station that the Air Quality Management Districts maintains. And what I'm showing in these little inset pictures, you see some graphs, and this would be like a 1-to-1 line on a clean day. And there's some purple air monitors, a very popular consumer monitor that's out there. And the purple air monitor is very, very close to the air quality station. And we see that, it's large and, largely recording the right numbers, and the numbers are right, it's clean air outside, you can see. On the next figure, this is over 2 weeks, we had the very heavy smoke in the Bay Area, and these numbers are appallingly bad, as you can see in the picture here. But the reported number on the purple air device was basically a factor of 2 high. So the air outside was really bad, but the purple air told you that it was really, really bad. So that could be a little bit of a concern. Now, if we look at some other, the purple air as well as some other consumer devices, now I flipped the axes around here, but the bottom line is, whether it was a research grade instrument or it was some of these lower cost consumer instruments, they all correlated very well with the true value, but they were all generally about a factor of 2 high over what the truth was. And the important aspect there is they oftentimes would appropriate, say we had a true air quality index, should have been in that yellowish to maybe getting into the category where it's unhealthy for sensitive individuals, but it's reporting that it's truly unhealthy outside. And so it can cause a little bit of concern and perhaps unnecessary fear, but I don't want to downplay that, they're providing very, very useful information. And I've used this particular slide was for another group, which was actually going to be working with these numbers. But I want to emphasize that we need to know your data. With a device like this, it's usually wrong, but it's oftentimes correctable. And there was a group at EPA that recently developed a set of correction factors for, I'm not sure if it's just the purple air, but it's a purple air and some other low-cost monitors. We also published a paper about the same time on adjustment factors for these low-cost monitors. And I guess one thing that a consumer may be able to look at is if you're using one of these devices in your home, it's a good idea to understand, to try to get an idea on if it's a purple air device, there is a correction factor that's available online that you can set it to this EPA correction factor, and it's going to be telling you, pretty much the correct numbers. And if it's a different device that you don't actually know what that correction factor is, you can take it outside. If the smoke's coming from pretty far away, we have found that the numbers that are represented around the Bay Area are amazingly consistent, and they can be consistently bad at the same time. So even if you're 3 or 4 miles away from the nearest reporting station, you can get a good idea of what the air is at your house by just looking at what it is at that reporting station. Now, this was a fun project that we had back in 2015. We didn't have these fun low-cost sensors yet. So the Air Resources Board had a project where they were looking at, with our new tight construction, we've got different opportunities when we're requiring mechanical ventilation. And we wanted to see what kind of impacts that had on PM coming from outside. And specifically, this was for near roadway construction. So these were new homes it was a single new home that was unoccupied, that we had the run of the house for a year. We had roughly $300,000 worth of instruments in the house, and it took 3 PhDs to maintain the darn thing over the course of the year. But the key aspect that we use the same instrument for both inside and outside, and we actually flipped them back and forth because particle instruments are just finicky. They can give different numbers for the same instrument that was calibrated, essentially together. And so it is really the ideal operation is to carry that instrument inside, carry that same instrument outside, and we had a switching manifold that essentially did that for us. And to show you just a couple of results from that and the flavor of what I want people to take home is, this was our reference system. And what I'm showing on this rather busy plot, and this is a log scale, the top part are what the particle numbers were doing outside. Now, this was not during a wildfire period. It was during, the 4th of July. You can see a spike in the numbers. And the bottom part of this curve is what the measured numbers were inside the home. And the difference between these two is an important factor that we talk about a lot. It's called the indoor-outdoor ratio. And this was our baseline home, nothing special going on in the home. We had an exhaust ventilation, and we were getting about a 50% reduction in the, on the values inside the home from what was outside. So if we had air that was, think of it, there was a wildfire impact in the area, and we were in that just starting to become unhealthy air outside, we're automatically getting a 50% reduction. That's going to push the thing down into probably the, the green to, low yellow type of category. And we had another system that we were testing there. And this one had, kind of like most of the bells and whistles. However, it was hooked up to the thermostat. And in the summertime, if the AC was not running, we see that we had very little protection. We were getting back to our baseline of about 50%. This is now on a log scale also. But whenever the AC was cycling and we had very high levels of filtration, we were getting a 95% reduction in the stuff that was coming from outside. And so what can a sophisticated consumer do with some of the information that I'm talking about here? Well, first off, don't panic, because we can usually do something. If you monitor the air inside, compare it to the best of your ability to a like instrument outdoors. EPA has a very good website that's called, well, they have a website called Air Now, and something that they added to the Air Now website that turned out to be a very valuable resource whenever the wildfires were impacting us last fall was this fire.airnow.gov. And it gave you very nice maps of the air quality stations that are the regulatory monitors, as well as hundreds to thousands of these consumer monitors shown on the same map that they attempted to adjust to the best of their ability with the correction factors that were shown in that one paper. And that's going to tell you what is going on outside. But if you want to know what's inside and you have your own instrument, you can take it outside, or you can compare to what the Air Now is to find out what's going on. And it's important whenever you're looking at making changes inside the home to know what's going on outside. Because if you recall from my pictures of the house in Sacramento, we were seeing large changes over relatively short periods of time. So if you've turned on a fan, you bought a new portable room air cleaner and you've installed it in your house, it's kind of a good idea to know, well, was it really the room air cleaner that was doing a job changing out the filter, putting in a MERV 12 instead of a MERV 8, or was it just that things are getting better outside? So I guess some take-home messages too. I forgot to, my build here is wrong. If it's bad outside, shut your doors and windows. This will likely yield a 50% reduction in the values. If you have a forced air system, turn the fan to on rather than the auto setting. And it reduces, it'll reduce the values. It depends on what kind of filter you have or this and the size of the fan, but it can pretty dramatically reduce the values to the 90-95% levels. And if you have a portable room air cleaner or access to a portable room air cleaner, use that. There's a term that is a rating system for portable room air cleaners called the Clean Air Delivery Rate. AHAM is a trade organization that talks about, they do the certification for these, and they have good guidelines on how to select a room air cleaner for your space. Like, it's not going to do any good to get a 300 CFM CADR and expect it to clean a basketball auditorium, but it's going to do great in something like a bedroom or a house. And people have been DIYing filter fans. Why that? I mean, there's then this interest in, if you don't have, because if the fires hit, instantly all the portable room air cleaners are sold out, and they have a long lead time to actually get them. And we have, people have these, buy box fans. Box fans have high flow rates, and you can tape a filter to the back side of the box fan, and the flow rate goes way down. You start off, we had 2000 CFM flowing through the fan. You tape the filter on, it drops down to 205 CFM. And I measured for this particular fan and filter combination, I had a filter efficiency of 65%. And that ended up giving me a clean air delivery rate of 132 CFM. And one thing to point out with doing this, I'm not a giant fan of suggesting people do these DIY fan filter combinations. For one thing is, if you look at a product that is pretty readily available, it does have a little bit of money. I forget how much these things cost now. I mean, they're in the $100 to $200 range. You can get a good portable room air cleaner. It's got a higher CADR rating by almost a factor of 2, and it's using less power. I could also say that one of these two is quieter than the other, so it's more likely going to be used, and I'll leave it up to you to guess which one that would be. And in summary, most of these low-cost monitors, they're likely to over-report the wildfire smoke by a factor of 2. And it's crazy, but they are performing pretty much as well as my $10,000 research instruments. Even though with the $10,000 research instruments, we need to ensure that we're getting the proper adjustment factors for the sources that we're dealing with. And indoor measurements, we really ideally want to be able to do something outdoors at the same time. We can quite easily get 90% type of improvements over outdoors if we have some ability to have some filtration or fans in our homes. Failing that, with closed doors and closed windows, we'll probably get 50% or even a little bit better if it's more modern construction. And I think I'm wrapping things up here. I would just like to leave with one final note. People are in this community are quite interested in electrification and getting rid of gas. I just like to note that doing things inside is very easy to get really bad numbers if you don't use things like your range hood and if you cook a breakfast. And this, I think the data that was presented here was even done with cooking over an induction cooktop. And so we can be exposed to high PM even, from indoor sources, and just make sure that we have a mechanism to take care of that. And I think that's going to wrap it up what I've got here. Maybe done a couple minutes early or right on time.
You are exactly on time. So I will ask one question that came in for you, Woody, through the Q&A, but then I'm probably just going to jump into the panel Q&A. Purple Air provides several conversion options. Do you have a recommendation for which is most useful or accurate during wildfires?
I could say that I've got a pet peeve about that, but there's a lot of confusion on that. The one that seems to be the most accurate is use the EPA correction. However, and got to take a deep breath here because there has been a lot of confusion with the Purple Air map. The Purple Air map is a great resource. It shows 2 dots, or one dot can have a black ring around it. The black ring around it is a self-identified indoor sensor. And the sensor that's used underneath the Purple Air has 2 different reporting numbers. One of them is adjusted for some air that was measured in Beijing, and the other one's the raw sensor adjustment. And so whenever you use the conversion factor on the Purple Air map, it applies the right conversion factor for the outdoor monitors, but it applies it not quite correctly, to the last of my knowledge, to the indoor monitors. And so people could send me if they're interested in that, I could have a discussion later or send me an email, because if you're savvy and can download the data from it, it's relatively straightforward to adjust.
Okay. And one more came in that was a question that I had too. So can you comment on how things like continuous fresh air requirements, like a bath fan, like for a new home that is, sealed quite tight, and we have those kinds of requirements for keeping airflow going. It might be good for fresh air intake, but how does that affect indoor air quality or smoke intrusion during wildfire events?
So the test house that we did, that was the reference system, was a bathroom exhaust, continuous bathroom exhaust fan, modern construction. So it was a TakeHome ACH 50 of 3. So it was reasonable, but not ultra tight. It gave the same performance of like a MERV 12 supply filtration system going to it. So, but that was an unoccupied house, so we ensured that the doors, everything was left up closed most of the time. And if in a real home, your bathroom exhaust fan is going to, if you're only going to get the benefit of the filtration of the envelope if everything is closed. The minute a door or a window's open, and you could, even a window or a crack as like you can see daylight around, essentially stops functioning as a filter.